So I wanted to start just by saying, seeing all of these people here makes me feel loved. And I appreciate that. It's nice to see so many people came to show up for this. So my talk is When Things Fall Apart in Europe. So what we're going to get is, I'm going to walk you through my experience going back to Europe after over 3 decades. And my experience doing this while reading Pema Chodron's When Things Fall Apart and how it related to what I was experiencing going back. I also want to mention that I sent this link to my aunt in Holland, and I noticed that she's online right now. So that's just another part of what makes me feel very loved. So we start off with Pema. What we call obstacles are really the way the world and our entire experience teach us where we're stuck. What may appear to be an arrow or a sword, we can actually experience as a flower. Whether we experience what happens to us as obstacles and enemy or as teacher and friend depends entirely on our perception of reality. It depends on our relationship with ourselves. What we find as practitioners is that nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know. So the last time I was in Europe, that's what I looked like. It's quite a while ago. And actually, I'm dressed the way I am today, wearing this skirt, because I bought this about a year before that picture was taken in Germany. And actually, my Aunt Graciela, who's online right now, this is what I wore to Christmas dinner when Noelia was 2 years old. So just an interesting side note. At the time when I went to Europe, when I was in the military, I was first stationed at Fort Ord, which is non-existent now in the Monterey area. And I was going through a really tough time. I was the victim of abuse that actually started with an act of violence. And in the Army, it's hard to get justice, or at least it was at that time. So I dealt with it by leaving. And I had a friend that happened to work in an area where she could put you on orders. And I asked her to do something for me. And so she arranged it so I could go on orders to Europe. And so I ran away. But Pema does say that it's good to change your perspective, not necessarily always good to run away. So in this case, I had to run away because I had to get out of a highly abusive situation, and that was the only way I knew how to do it. So this time, when I was going to Europe, I reflected on that, on the mess that I was back then, that I had totally lost myself. And I thought I needed an appropriate book to celebrate that I'm not there anymore, but that I wasn't necessarily feeling wonderful. I wasn't necessarily in the same situation I was way back then, but I'm still dealing with stuff. It's just now it's different stuff, right? It's the adult stuff. So I decided to go with the book. When I was looking at my Kindle and all my choices for books, I decided to go with this one because I remembered Daniel had talked about it in one of his Dharma talks. I thought, that sounded really interesting. So I decided to go with Pema Chodron's When Things Fall Apart, in honor of the last time I was in Europe when they were falling apart. So she starts off with this quote: "Embarking on the spiritual journey is like getting into a very small boat and setting out on the ocean to search for unknown lands. With wholehearted practice comes inspiration, but sooner or later, we will also encounter," anybody want to guess? Trouble, obstacles, freedom, courage, fear. So what makes this interesting is because I had just had a darshan with Lama, where I was sharing with him that I've had a strange relationship with fear my whole life. I have a biological father and a stepfather who always kind of pushed you to be tough, or at least pushed me. So I became the person who would climb up to the top of a diving board, and I would jump off knowing that I'll probably die, right? So I had the fear, and I didn't necessarily feel good about it, but I did it anyways. This is what Pema says about fear. Underneath our ordinary lives, underneath all the talking we do, all the moving we do, all the thought in our minds, there's a fundamental groundlessness. There's a bubbling along all the time. We experience it as restlessness and edginess. We experience it as fear. It motivates passion, aggression, ignorance, jealousy, and pride, but we never get down to the essence of it. So I'm wondering, does any of that resonate with anybody here? This idea that we have this, I see Andrew chuckling, we have this constant angst going on about, feeling about the things going on in our life, or to be honest, I even feel it when it's boredom. I feel angst when I have boredom. My response for most of my life has been what you see here. And actually, that's a picture of my son jumping off a place called the Edge of the World in Hawaii. But my response had always been to just jump, that I never really took time to recognize what I was feeling, to understand where that was going or where it was coming from. I almost had an impulsive response. And I believe Lama, and he's right behind me, right? He called it the fuck it response, right? That you might be feeling fear, but you just dive in anyways. I find that in the course of my life, I've done that a lot, but it's actually kind of a way of avoidance. Like I'm not actually paying attention to what's driving me. I'm kind of trying to prove something. I'm still trying to prove it to my two fathers, right? That I can handle this and I'm tough, that I don't get scared, that I could take on challenges. I'm constantly trying to prove something and not dealing with things. And so what I recognized was that this has kind of been a theme through a lot of my life, and that I overlook it. I overlook things. I get around it by attacking it, right? Just doing it. This idea of just jumping, I'm attacking it, but I'm not actually dealing with it. My boss once introduced me as a truly fearless leader, which I thought was hilarious. I thought also, what a crock. It's interesting that people have that perception, right? But I know that I'm not fearless. It's just I hadn't always been able to identify my fears. So it was interesting that as I started on this journey and I was already thinking about fear and talking to Lama about fear, the first chapter's on fear. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. So here she talks about transitioning. Each day we're given opportunities to open up or shut down. Most of us do not take these situations as teachings. We automatically hate them. We run like crazy. Basically, disappointment, embarrassment, and all those places where we just cannot feel good are sort of death. Things like disappointment and anxiety are messengers telling us that we're about to go into unknown territory. So as I was reading that, I thought, I'm not only going into unknown mental and emotional territory, but I'm going back to Europe, which I haven't been in for over 3 decades. So it was unknown territory. And then she says, the way to resolve our resistance to life is to meet it face to face. And that's a theme that kept coming up over and over again in what Pema was talking about. She says the energy of our emotions pierces us to the heart, that we need to feel them completely and deeply, which means You need to feel them before you jump. We need to lean forward into the discomfort of life and see it clearly rather than protecting ourselves from it. And so I did. In the moments of silence and aloneness, I felt everything. So I did a lot of thinking on this trip. I started in Amsterdam, where I spent a couple of days. So here's a picture of, the Dutch are a seafaring bunch, and I'll talk a little bit more about them. But I started in Amsterdam and I went straight to my aunt and uncle. So that's Graciela, who's online right now, and my uncle Alex. I used to visit them when I was stationed in Germany. I would go there for Easter, go there for Christmas. They're a very warm and welcoming couple, and I love them dearly. They have a home in Argentina because Graciela is Argentinian, and they have a home in Holland. And I've been to both Argentina in their home, and Graciela kept saying, Linda, you got to come visit us in Holland. So I told her I would, and I did. My uncle is special to me because he's very interesting. He worked as a project manager in agriculture for the World Bank. So he's traveled all over the world, lived in some crazy different places. One of them was Sierra Leone, and he talks about the first time he was ever working, doing a project. He was airdropped into a European camp in Sierra Leone, and the next day they had a revolution, and the revolutionaries came through the European camp and killed everybody, shot them dead, all the Europeans. My uncle said he stayed alive because he pulled a mattress over himself and made it look like he was in an empty room. And for the next 6 months, he befriended a young boy who would go to the market and get him food until after 6 months, the revolution was over. They were able to get him out, and he actually stayed in that industry and had more crazy experiences. So I just love going to see him and hearing all these stories that he tells. He tells another story about children in Africa, because he did different projects and different research, children in Africa and children in Guatemala. And each group of children had been impacted by trauma. The group in Africa, and I'm sure you heard of the diamond mines, right? So they were told, the parents of the children were told that you need to let us use your children to collect diamonds. Or they told the parents, that was the story. I might not get it all right, but I'm going to be pretty close. The parents were told, you need to help us collect diamonds. And if you don't, we're going to cut off one of the arms of each of your children. The parents did not collect the diamonds. And so all of their children lost an arm. The group in Guatemala, I believe it was Guatemala, the children had seen the massacre of their families in a revolutionary war. So the research that my uncle was doing was trying to see the two different ways that those situations were handled. In the case of the children in Sierra Leone, I think it was Sierra Leone, it could be another African country, I might be wrong, I get them confused. The teachers, when they went back to school, asked them to tell their story. And so each kid stood up and told their story of trauma, and they were open with talking about it. Whereas in Guatemala, they were told not to talk about it, to pretend it didn't happen. Well, it goes without saying, and you guys probably already know this, but the research indicated that the children in Africa fared much better in school and life than the children in Guatemala. And that was the research. And so I feel like that's kind of like what we're talking about here, that we can't ignore our trauma. We can't ignore our pain. We have to grapple with it, or it haunts us the rest of our life. That suffering is a necessary component to spiritual living. And I saw that also as I traveled throughout Europe. So this is Amersfoort. It's a cute little medieval city where my aunt and uncle live. So It's one of the, I think it's actually older than Amsterdam, but it's cute, isn't it? So funny thing about the Dutch people, my mom's side of the family is all Dutch. My stepfather's also Dutch. The Dutch people managed to not get captured when there were Roman conquests and whatnot, because they would strategically release water so they couldn't cross the water. So they didn't have to actually get involved in any combat. Another funny thing is when the French came around to do a census of Dutch people, the Dutch people resented the French, of all people, coming to find out, how many of each they had. So they gave them fake surnames. And that's why today, when you go to Holland, you'll find a lot of people with the last name Born Naked or the King. Yes. And so from there, I was only there a couple of days, and then I took a plane to Rome, Italy, where my son met me. So this is my 26-year-old son who lives in San Francisco. And so these three pictures, the one all the way on the left is the Colosseum. The one in the middle is the Castle of St. Angelis. And the one all the way on the right is Trevi Fountain. So we had a great time, my son and I. And I think it's kind of funny when I look at these pictures, maybe in the one of Trevi Fountain all the way to the right, you could kind of tell we're related because we have sort of the same smile. But other than that, you would never know. So when we find ourselves in a mess, we don't have to feel guilty about it. Instead, we could reflect on the fact that how we related to this mess will be sowing the seeds of how we will relate to what happens next. Ironically, when I spent all this time with my son, he said to me, "Mom, the one thing you taught me that I didn't learn from anyone else was to stay calm when things are getting crazy." It's funny, later on, we'll find out how I did not listen to my own advice. Here's a picture of the Vatican. I actually happened upon it the first night I was in Rome before my son even got there. I didn't know I was that close to it. It was beautiful. It's also interesting that most of these Catholic monuments are built on top of the Roman monuments. So the Vatican is on top of the Circus of Caligula. And I don't know if you know very much about Caligula, but he was a bad dude, not a nice man. And it's just interesting how the Catholic Church took over these areas and kind of recreated them with a whole different theme. This is the Roman ruins, which was probably the highlight of my trip. I found the ruins and the catacombs to be the most enjoyable for visiting because they were less touristy. It felt more authentic. And as I was walking around in the ruins, you kind of feel like you're walking among spirits of the past, almost like they're still there with you. It's kind of spooky, especially in the catacombs. That was a lot of fun. Themes that kept coming up for me, kind of like when I talked about the Circus of Caligula being replaced by the Vatican in Vatican City, was pride and ego. The pride and ego of the Romans was replaced by visions, paintings, symbols of vulnerability, suffering, and perseverance. I kept seeing that they were being replaced. And then what I've noticed is this idea that the vulnerability, suffering, and perseverance creates transformation that can lead to transcendence. So I was in one of the many basilicas there, and there was a preacher, I guess it would be a priest, who said, "You cannot follow without detachment. You cannot follow without renunciation of things of this world." Does that sound familiar? I mean, it sounds like it could have come from Lama, right? And I thought that was interesting that I was seeing the same kind of themes like we're talking about. And then even Pema's talking about sitting with our suffering. And that it's actually through our suffering that we can transform. So after 6 days, I went back to The Hague, Holland, with my aunt. So there's a picture of her again. We were goofing around. The Hague is where the World Court is. It's also the city where my mother was born and grew up. A couple months ago, I read a poem at Expressions about, it's called, what do we call it? Playing in the Rubble. And it's a poem about how my mom would talk about post-World War II, because she was a World War II baby, that her and her brothers would play in the rubble of these destroyed buildings. And she thought the whole world looked like that. That was normal. And I thought, we're kind of all sort of playing in the rubble. We're all playing in our brokenness. Anyway, maybe I'll do it again or read the poem again sometime in Expressions. So the next day, the day after we went to The Hague, was Graciela and my birthday party. So her birthday's one day after mine, and we planned my trip so that we could have our birthdays together. And she was so sweet. She brought together all of my cousins, or most of my cousins, for this day. And it was just a beautiful day. Some of my cousins I never met because they weren't alive when I left. Some of them I hadn't seen since I was 14 years old. And some of them I saw as soon as 7 years ago. For a person who grew up with no family around, because remember, my parents are immigrants, so we didn't have aunts and uncles and cousins and all of that. We were pretty much alone. It was a beautiful day. Here's a picture of all the cousins. You can see the big smiles. So it was a beautiful day. It was such a gift. Pema also talks about these moments in our life where it's even a beautiful day like this has a death. Things die, right? But in this case, it's a moment. It's a beautiful moment that we can't go back to, but we can appreciate for what it was. But bad things die, good things die. We're constantly transforming. But it was such a beautiful day. And I hope Graciela is listening, and I thank you for that too. So then Pema says, the spiritual journey involves going beyond hope and fear, stepping into unknown territory, and continually moving forward. The most important aspect of being on the spiritual path may be to just keep moving. So that very next day, I started traveling alone. My first stop, now I did this years ago as well. I traveled when I was in the Army. I backpacked through Europe and stayed in youth hostels, met all kinds of people. It was really cool. I'm okay with that. But remember, I'm the person that jumps. I ignore the fear and just jump. So the same thing when I'm traveling, I just ignore it and I go. So I was kind of traveling like I did 30 years earlier, but this time I had more money. I stayed in nicer hotels, not youth hostels. So this was actually my birthday. And I had been in Cologne years earlier, and I saw the band U2 with a bunch of German friends, and I hung out with British soldiers. So I had some great memories. As I started traveling alone, I came into the chapters on loneliness. I mean, Pema always knows what's going on with me during this trip. So she talks about cool and hot loneliness. Cool loneliness allows us to look honestly and without aggression at our own minds. We can gradually drop our ideals of who we think we ought to be, who we think we want to be, or why we think other people think we want to be or ought to be. So this was very much like my experience, and maybe one of the reasons why sometimes I like running away and traveling alone. It's because nobody knows you. Nobody has expectations of you. You aren't living up to anyone's ideals because they could care less. You just get to be kind of sort of invisible. And that's how I felt traveling and going through these different places. I went to the cathedral there that I had been to many years earlier, which is just gorgeous. It's a very Gothic cathedral. And then I went to a museum that had Picassos and Warhols and a whole area that was about United States, right? So it's German perspectives of the United States, which I thought was interesting. USA eat, USA die, USA 666. And if you're a Christian, I think that's the mark of the beast, right? USA hug, USA air. Some interesting perspectives. And then this other monument you see there is a portable war monument. So you can move it around and it's a chalkboard. So people are writing on there. You can make it whatever war you want it to be. You just write what war you're talking about. And right next to it, you see the soda fountain with the couple of folks drinking a soda and having a hot dog and are very casual about it. Like, it's just another war. We're going to go to war and then we're going to have a hot dog and a soda. So that was interesting. And then another thing I enjoyed about traveling alone was when you're an open person and you're alone, not talking to anyone else or, in conversation with anyone else or spending time with anyone else, people are kind of open to talking to you. So this picture on the left is my first night in Rome. I went out and got some dinner for myself. And of course, if anybody knows me, I always have interesting shoes, right? So this woman on the table next to me with the glasses, she commented on my shoes. And so we started a conversation. She was a Scottish woman. Her husband there is from Norway. And her name was Linda. So we had a great conversation. And then this couple behind her showed up and he was Scottish as well. So they started talking and he kind of reminded me of Shrek. So I called him Shrek. On the right side, the other picture, this is my actual birthday. A saxophonist came around and was collecting money, right, for playing the saxophone at the area where I was eating dinner. And I said I'd give him a couple of pounds, not pounds, euros. I'd give him a couple of euros if he would play Happy Birthday for me. So he played Happy Birthday, and then some drunk German started picking flowers all around the garden and giving them to me and calling me his queen. And so for a couple minutes, I was a little concerned I'd have to shake him before I get back to my hotel because I didn't want him following me. And it was an Australian couple that took that picture. And so I chatted with them for a while. So that was fun. It's kind of fun being alone and being mysterious and without really any real identity and meeting people like that. My next trip was to Burgess in Belgium, which was kind of the New York of the Middle Ages. This is the port where all of the products would come in from other places. So in the Middle Ages, it was a really well-developed city. And it was fun. I had a good time there. I have 3 little videos. Let's see if they're going to work right. So you can see I was on a boat, did a lot of boat trips. The second one was a concert at this cathedral, about an hour long, that I really enjoyed. So it would play different types of music. And that's just a medieval courtyard. So you'll notice that everything is going great on my trip so far, right? I'm not having any real issues except for the drunk German. May have been a problem, but he wasn't. Often in our daily lives, we panic. We feel heart palpitations and stomach grumblings because we're arguing with somebody or because we had a beautiful plan and it's not working out. I had a beautiful plan. What's the name of the book? Right. At some point it had to happen, right? Especially since it had been so synchronous. Curiously enough, we also experience egolessness when we don't know what's happening, when we've lost our reference point, when we get a shock and our mind is stopped. So I was so proud of myself because even though on my app and in the actual train stations, they spelled the names of towns differently, like Courtrai was Kerchek, right? Completely different. And I still managed to figure it out. So I was so proud of myself. And so I got to another train station after that confusion with the name. I got on the right train. I asked the train conductor, is this the train to Lily Flanders? Yes, she probably didn't understand English, but I realize that now. I asked people on the train, is this the train to Lily Flanders? Yeah, they nodded, didn't understand a word I was saying. So I'm like, cool. I've got this figured out. So 50 minutes later, when we should be arriving in Lily Flanders, we were not in Lily Flanders. So I got off the train and I'm starting to feel a little panicked, because I know I've got hotel reservations. I made plans. I got tickets to do this, tickets to do that. And I found out that I was on the wrong part of the train, that the train actually split and one part went one direction and the other part went the other direction. And I was on the wrong part. I didn't even know if I was still in Belgium or if I was in France or Germany. I had no idea where I was. So I had to get back on the train and go back to where I was and buy another ticket for another seat to the train I had to connect to. And so, I thought, oh, I can handle this. This is okay. So I got back, I'm feeling good. Then I get to Lily Flanders and they have two train stations about a half a mile apart. And so I couldn't quite tell if I needed to be at this train station or if I needed to be at that train station. And I had my backpack with me. And so I thought, okay, well, I think I have to go to that train station. So I ran to that train station. And then I looked at my app and I thought, no, I think I need to be at the other one. Then I ran to the other one, got on a train, got nervous and thought, oh no, I need to be at the other one, got off, ran back. So, I must have done about at least 2 miles with a backpack running back and forth. And then I missed my train. It's really fallen apart now. So at that point, I was not following the advice that my son talked about, holding it together. I was physically exhausted too, because I'd been doing a lot of walking, but I was ready to cry. And so in my pathetic state, I went into the office and, started tearing up, saying, I missed my train. And the gentleman got me on another train going to France 2 hours later. And so I finally got there at 5. I think, I got there at 5 o'clock, 5 hours later than I was supposed to get there. But I made it to the Eiffel Tower, but not without having more problems. I got to my hotel after being on the most crowded subway I've ever been on. As a matter of fact, what I remember about it is there was an African woman holding a baby on the subway, not holding anything else. And I thought, wow, that sucks. Not even to have anything to put the baby in. It just seemed so vulnerable, right? It just seemed very precarious. And I thought that I'd be okay because the Olympics were over, but I completely forgot about the Paralympics. So that was probably why it was so crowded. So I went to the Eiffel Tower and that was nice, but that was after I walked the wrong way for an hour and a half. So mind you, I did a couple of miles back and forth, right? Then I walked the wrong way to the Eiffel Tower and had to turn around, go the right way. So by the time I got there, I felt like my legs were going to fall off. Seriously, I was just in so much pain and so exhausted. But I got to see the Eiffel Tower for the first time, and that was fun. I was hoping the next day I would have more luck, have fewer issues. And that night, I went to bed and woke up at like 5 a.m. because I heard my name. I don't know if you guys have, anyone here ever experienced that? It's almost like you hear someone else saying your name. So I heard my name and it was a male voice and it woke me up an hour before I was supposed to wake up. And I got up and I looked in the hallway and I looked outside and there was no men. And I realized it was coming from my own head. The very next line I read in Pema's book was, it's interesting to hear one's own voice. It sounds like someone else's voice. I thought, no kidding. So then I went on to the Louvre Museum and I picked this particular sculpture because I always thought it was so cool. A band I like has a sculpture like this by the same artist on their cover, Dead Can Dance. I don't know if anybody knows that band, but it's always veiled people, and he's able to capture the image and then do a really good job of capturing a veil on top of it. And isn't it a great metaphor for what we're experiencing in samsara, right? We're all veiled, right? It's trying to remove the veil. And I'm just curious if you guys know who this person might be, if you recognize who that might be. So this is a little quiz. Who do you think that is? No? Yes, Joan of Arc. So that's right. And I like Joan of Arc because, like me, she was a soldier, but she started at 16. I started at 17. And, you know, at 16, she managed to turn around 100 years war, and then they burned her at the stake. Do you guys know why they burned her at the stake? They burned her at the stake because she was wearing men's clothing. Is that crazy or what? Anyways, so I always liked Joan of Arc. So after I spent a couple hours in the Louvre. I remember my legs were ready to fall off. And I just decided I've had enough museums. I wanted to get out. It took me 45 minutes to get out of the Louvre. And then when I got out, I was in an underground mall. So then I had to figure out how to get out of there. It was like a nightmare. So I felt very trapped. On the subways, I felt trapped. At the Louvre, I felt trapped. And I was supposed to go on a boat ride. And so I made it all the way to where the boat was and stood in line and realized I think I'm going to be late for my train if I do this boat, because the French time works differently than American time, right? They don't necessarily leave right on time. They don't necessarily come back right on time. So I thought, this is a risk. And then I'm going to have more train problems, right? If I miss my train. So I actually jumped out of the line. I thought, what would Pema do? I jumped out of the line, said, it's just not worth it. This has been interesting. You know, I appreciate the experience I had, but I think I'm going to head back to the train station. It's a good thing I did that because they had closed down some of the trains due to the Olympics, train stations, I should say, some of the train stations due to the Olympics. And every train station that my Suri was taking me to was closed. So it took me a long time, again, walking to get back to the train station. And then at that point, I was fully embracing what Pema was talking about. I wasn't going to let it bother me. So, I mean, I almost expected that things were going to be falling apart so that I could add, you know, have some humor about it. When I got to the train station, it turns out that I had a seat for a 3:30 train and a ticket for a 2:30 train. And I just, when they told me, I just said figures, right? So I finally got on the train to go back to Holland. And I was feeling Ye Teng Che, which is Tibetan. So I know Lama's always questioning us. What is Ye Teng Che? Would you know what that means, Lama? Okay. Yetangche. Totally tired out. I was totally tired out. I just wanted the hell out of France. So as I got on the train headed back, I read in Pema's book, it's like riding on a train sitting backwards. We can't see where we're headed. only where we've been. And of course, I was riding on the train, sitting backwards. Things falling apart is a kind of testing and also a kind of healing. We think that the point is to pass the test or to overcome the problem, but the truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together and they fall apart. Then they come together again and they fall apart again. And so as weird as this may sound, I'm actually grateful for the experience in France because it was demonstrative of what Pema was trying to show me. That at some point you just have to let it go and not let it impact you so much. It's going to fall apart and it's going to come together. Life is going to be good and then it's going to suck. And then it's going to be good again and then it's going to suck again. Okay. Thank you. I'm about done.
I have a so this is why things are odd. Yeah. So yeah, I have a phone call I gotta make.
Okay.
You know that world, right?
Yes.
This is a psychotherapy call. So
Okay.
so I really appreciate this. And then I get a special showing to see how it all ends. All right. So next weekend, Sunday, we're having the nuns from Judchup Choling come. It's really a special occasion. So please be aware. And so I have a special showing, right, Linda? You show me how it ends?
Yeah. I mean, we're real close.
Yeah, I know, but
Okay. I understand
I
though.
need to be on time.
I understand, but thank you for being here.
I'm getting to know you better now. This is what I like about these talks, not just the content, but we get to know each other, don't we?
Thank you for being here. Okay, just wrapping it up. I paid attention to some strange art that I saw that didn't make sense to me and there was no explanation. This was in the one on the far left was in the Hall of Maps. So they would have these little sculptures on the side of the maps and I had no idea what was going on with that guy, but he looked interesting. The one in the middle was in the Louvre and it looks like a troll. But again, there was no real explanation. The one on the right was in the Castle of St. Angeles. They had these sculptures right below the paintings of bearded, breasted people. So hermaphrodites. And there was no explanation. So that was interesting. I guess they're the yin and the yang together. The process of becoming unstuck requires tremendous bravery because basically we are completely changing our way of perceiving reality, like changing our DNA. The middle way is wide open, but it's tough going because it goes against the grain of an ancient neurotic pattern that we all share. When we feel lonely, when we feel hopeless, when what we want to do is move, we don't want to go through the detox. The middle way encourages us to do that, just that. It encourages us to awaken the bravery that exists in everyone without exception. I feel that what Pema is telling us to do is similar to the life of a caterpillar. The caterpillar goes into the cocoon or the chrysalis and turns into goo in order to transform. That doesn't sound comfortable. It doesn't sound fun. The caterpillar has no choice, right? They're destined to do that. We have a choice, but in order to transform, we have to experience that time as goo and it's not comfortable. That's what I see Pema talking about. It's being brave enough to allow yourself to be vulnerable, to allow yourself to turn into goo and be supported, kind of like the chrysalis, by the three precious jewels, the Buddha, the Sangha, and the Dharma. So these were the goodbyes, saying goodbye to my family in Europe. It was so sweet. And then Pema ends with this kinship with the suffering of others. This is the inability to continue to regard it from afar, is the discovery of our soft spot, the discovery of bodhicitta. So as we come to terms with our own suffering, we become better at being there for other people's suffering. We become bodhicittas. Also in her book, she says, to live and be willing to die. To live is to be willing to die over and over again. And just like you see in the Christian imagery, it's suffering, death, transformation, and transcendence. So I saw similar things with Buddhism there. And that's it. Any questions? Do we need a, there we go.
Hello. Okay. Hi. Thank you. That was really cool. I was in Europe this summer too, and brought back a lot of memories, good and not good. So you were there 30 years ago.
Actually more.
Okay. And there was some degree of running from pain that you
Yes.
described. And so I just was wondering, when you're back and, memories came back, I'm sure from that time, like, with the perspective of your Buddhist path and with reading this book, how did you relate to that identity now versus how you were 30 years ago or 30 plus years ago? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think when I look back on young Linda, young, dumb Linda, I was still jumping, right? I would experience something and ignore it and not deal with it, and then jump into a situation that was even worse. And then I would have to run away, right? So I think looking back on it now, I recognize those patterns, and it's the patterns that keep us in samsara. And I recognize me doing it today, right? When my boss introduces me as truly fearless leader, I know it's baloney, right? But I need to slow down and pay attention to myself and my almost, my habitual response to ignore what I'm feeling. So the old Linda was jumping. This Linda is trying not to. I don't know if I answered your question completely.
That's good. No, it's in line with, I think, what Pema was trying to teach.
Right.
Hey, Linda. I don't really have a question. I just wanted to thank you for letting us into a little bit of your world. I feel like I know you better now, and it's inspiring. I have never given a talk because of my extreme fear, of course, and so you've inspired me. Not that I'm going to give a talk anytime soon, but it's nice to know you a little bit better.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah.
I wanted to, I have actually mentioned this to Patty, but for people who have fear of talking, I I guess I've been jumping even in those cases, right? Just jumping in. You can do a talk with more than one person if it makes you more comfortable. Okay.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate you being vulnerable with sharing a small part of your experience in Germany and being in the army. It really hit home for me because since March, when I got diagnosed with thyroid cancer, I've been processing it, and I knew that my cancer came from a military base in Germany. And
Wow.
my doctors confirmed this last week that my cancer genes that I have comes from nuclear radiation exposure. And when you were talking about, your history with abuse, the patterns and running, it really helped me to process some of the emotions and what I've been avoiding. And it also showed me the power of when one woman shares her story, how it helps another. So I'm extremely grateful for you being able to have that vulnerability.
And you as well.
Thank you.
I can't tell if there's anyone online.
Thank you for your talk, Linda. I wonder, just given the years where your life story took place, and this is maybe a rhetorical question instead of one that can be answered, but did your sort of um attitude or way you viewed like your life experiences change sort of at least in correlation with like some of society's attitudes or changes towards like how to like whether to just ignore stuff that was painful versus like talking about it and processing it? Because I think while it might have always been an option, I think there might have been an increasing trend.
I think you're right. So my stepfather that raised me, when my parents divorced in my last year of high school, and that was one of the reasons I went in the army, because I had nowhere to go. I was 17. I had nowhere to go. My father didn't believe in therapy. We never saw a therapist. Actually, both my father and my stepfather have similar views. You just deal with it. And actually going into the military back then, their attitude was the same way, right? You just suck it up. So yeah, I would say that society and the people around me did support suppression, right? Suppression of feelings. And as I got out, there were some points in my life where if I keep suppressing it, I'm going to be dead. Right. And then, yeah, I thought it's better to see a therapist and be dead. Right. So yeah, at times I did not follow the same trend. And I also saw the impact of doing that on my siblings, right? Because they have their own struggles. I believe also largely related to the fact that we were such a closed family that we didn't talk about things that weren't working. We didn't talk about our pain. They still suppress it. Takes courage, a different kind of courage than the one type of courage that my fathers supported. Takes a different kind of courage. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Due to the can you hear? Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. May the teachings of the Buddha flourish, and may the upholders of the teachings remain forever. May all migrators achieve happiness, and may they fulfill all their ultimate goals. Losang, magical display of the deep awareness of all the victorious ones, merciful giver of a stream of profound and vast instructions to the fortunate migrators, please remain always unperishing, unchanging, unfading. Avalokiteshvara, great treasure of obligous compassion, Manjushri, master of flawless wisdom, Vajrapani, destroyer of the entire host of Mars, Sankapa, crown jewel of the snowy land sages, Losang Gyatso, I make requests at your holy feet. Announcements, anyone?
Okay, just a friendly reminder about Dharma Dudes starting shortly after we all disperse. So if you're new, Dharma Dudes is a men's group. Anyone's welcome. That is of that persuasion. um, and yeah, we just gather in fellowship and snacks and talk about the Dharma and talk about our lives, kind of like what Linda did.
Just a reminder to reiterate what Lama said, that next weekend or next Sunday, I guess, just on Sunday, we're welcoming a group of nuns, as well as a Gashima, a woman nun who has achieved the really high level of education and the degree of Geshe. So that's rare. We haven't had, this is new. And so this will be the first time we've had visitors like this. So it should be pretty fun. And the other thing I wanted to notice, or we wanted to express, is that, you know, we're all here. And we heard this really revealing and warm, lovely talk from Dharma sister Linda. And you know, this is community. And in order to keep this going, in order to have a place where you can be nourished and where you can find friendship and where you can find refuge, you know, that's Lion's Roar. And so we really hope that you feel that you're a member here, that you are part of this community, and that you're able to generously give of your time. You've been here for, some of you, a couple of hours. You were here for meditation as well. So if you've reaped some benefits, if you've gotten nourished by being here today, and you're going to be maybe doing something later on during the week, think about helping support this organization that is here for you, right? So we have a Dana box here. There's a Dana box in the back. Somewhere or another, we have a QR code that leads us to the website. I don't know where, do we have any of the? Oh, they're back there. Okay, anyway, so just think about, you know, giving us part of your hard-earned cash, if I may be so bold, just because this is community and we want to continue this community so we can be here for you.
Are there snacks or is there, we're meeting in the back? No, nothing. Oh, just Dharma Dudes. Okay. Have a great day. Enjoy it out there.
Omo araya pacayana indi. Om araya pacana indi. Om